event. It's a very good turnout for a noon event, I think, and we're very happy to have you all with us. I apologize for the slightly delayed beginning. We had to make room for the event that was before us, and we will endeavor to finish our event on time so that the next event can proceed without undue interruption. Thank you for joining us at this side event at the 58th session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. Greetings also to everyone who is joining us online. We're very glad that you are with us. My name is Joel Veldkamp, and I am the Director for Public Advocacy for Christian Solidarity International, the principal organizer of the side event. We're also very grateful to our co-sponsors today, the European Center for Law and Justice. The topic of this side event is Human Rights in Azerbaijan, the trials and continuing detention of ethnic Armenians. We will first hear a short video message from Lord David Alton, a member of the United Kingdom's House of Lords and the chair of the UK Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights. We will then proceed to a roundtable with our three expert panelists, which I will chair. During the final 15 minutes of this side event, we will open the floor to questions from our audience. Please be advised that according to the rules set for side events during the Human Rights Council, photography is not permitted. As the organizing NGO, CSI has designated one of our staff members to take photos of today's panel. That's the woman in the blue blazer in the back. Everyone else is kindly requested to refrain from taking photos or videos during this session. Please also keep in mind that this meeting is being streamed live to CSI's YouTube page, and it will be available to view online as a recording afterwards. Our topic today is one that is rapidly gaining urgency in the international community. In his report to the Human Rights Council on March 5, High Commissioner Volker Turk said, "All those arbitrarily detained in Azerbaijan, including ethnic Armenians, must be released immediately, and fair trial rights must be respected fully." 6 days ago, the European Parliament overwhelmingly adopted a motion condemning Azerbaijan's unjust detention of the Armenian hostages and demanding their immediate and unconditional release. The resolution passed with 453 votes in favor and only 31 against. And on Sunday, the National Security Advisor of the United States, Michael Waltz, stated that he had spoken to Hikmet Hajiev, the assistant to the president of Azerbaijan, and told him to, quote, release the prisoners. So who are these Armenian prisoners in Azerbaijan? Tomorrow will mark 18 months since the armed forces of Azerbaijan launched an attack on the former Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, leading to the forced displacement of the entire Armenian Christian population of the region. This attack followed a 9-month blockade of the region by Azerbaijani forces. It also followed a prolonged 44-day Azerbaijani military assault on Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, which ended 26 years of fragile peace in the region. In the course of these two wars and the blockade in between, hundreds of Armenians were captured by Azerbaijani forces and held long after the cessation of hostilities. 23 are still acknowledged to be held, and 80 more are considered forcibly disappeared. We will soon hear more about these detainees and the conditions of their detention from our panel of experts. But first, I would like to share some findings from a recent report by the Center for Truth and Justice about the conditions in which one of these 23 Armenians, Vicken Euljekjian, is being detained. Vicken is a citizen of both Armenia and Lebanon. A descendant of survivors of the Armenian genocide of 1915, he grew up in Lebanon, but relocated to Nagorno-Karabakh amidst Lebanon's economic crisis to start a business. However, in September 2020, he left again when Azerbaijan started the second large-scale war in Nagorno-Karabakh. On November 10, 2020, the day after a ceasefire came into effect, he was returning to collect some of his possessions when he passed through a checkpoint that had not been there before, an Azerbaijani checkpoint. The soldiers seized him and took him to Baku. He was falsely charged and convicted of fighting as a mercenary for Armenia, and he has been held in prison ever since. In detention, Vicken has been subjected to beatings and mock executions. He has had medical treatment for a digestive disorder withheld. He has been kept from contacting his family for long periods, and he has been subjected to constant physical and psychological abuse. Vicken is a devout Christian who has a cross tattooed on his hand. After his detention, Azerbaijani authorities broadcast one of his interrogations on television. His family watched the broadcast and noted visible burns on his hand, which they believed were deliberately inflicted to disfigure or erase his cross tattoo. The Center for Truth and Justice comments that testimonies collected reveal a pattern of targeting Armenians for their ethnicity and faith, including threats to deface or destroy Christian symbols such as crosses and the Bible. Vicken's wife, Linda, writes to us, "I humbly ask for your support in bringing Vicken home to us so he can receive the medical care and emotional support he so desperately needs. We remain hopeful that with your assistance, justice will prevail and Vicken will be reunited with his family." We'll now hear a short video message from David Lord Alton of the UK House of Lords.
Hostage taking is against the Geneva Convention and the Convention on the Taking of Hostages. And yet 23 Armenian people, ethnic Armenians, are held by Azerbaijan, arising out of the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. The best thing that Azerbaijan could do would be to release these hostages, to end the suffering that it's causing the families of loved ones who wonder about the fate of their loved ones, but also because it would help to pave the way for a better relationship between Baku and Armenia.
We express our thanks to Lord Alton for sending this message to this event today. I'd now like to introduce our panel from left to right. Siranush Sahakian is the founder and director of the International and Comparative Law Center in Yerevan. She has served as an aide to the President of Armenia, was in service at the Ministry of Justice in Armenia, chaired the corruption prevention body in Armenia, and was an ad hoc judge of the European Court of Human Rights. She has also represented the case of the Armenian detainees in Azerbaijan before the European Court of Human Rights. Philippe Kalfayan, PhD, is an associate researcher at the University Panthéon Assas in Paris. From 2001 to 2007, he was the Deputy Secretary General of the International Federation for Human Rights. He has been involved in the legal defense of the Armenian detainees since 2020, and in legal advocacy for the right of return of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh since 2023. Arpi Avatisian is an international human rights lawyer specializing in strategic litigation. Mrs. Avatisian has over 20 years hands-on experience in research, advocacy, capacity development, and strategic litigation before the European Court of Human Rights, the European Court of Justice, and UN human rights treaty bodies. Thank you very much all for being here with us. Siranush, let's start with the most recent developments. Azerbaijan announced about 2 weeks ago that the International Committee of the Red Cross will no longer be allowed to operate in the country. And this is a quite significant development because the ICRC had been one of the, if not the only, external body with access to the detainees. What does this mean for the detainees going forward?
Thank you. Yes, first let's fix that so far the only organization which access to Armenian hostages was ICRC. No other mechanism were allowed to access and monitor their conditions, psychological, physical situation, and other circumstances. So this step is against an organization with purely humanitarian mandate, which provided support to Armenian hostages. And this means it will have far-reaching, grave consequences for their treatment and well-being. In the absence of the ICRC, no independent mechanism will remain to scrutinize their conditions of detention, nor to ensure adherence to fundamental human rights and humanitarian law. Stripped of international oversight, these individuals will be left entirely at the mercy of Azerbaijani authorities who act in an atmosphere of hatred against Armenians. And this will expose them to very real dangers of indefinite detention, psychological and physical coercion, torture, and continued exploitation of hostages as instruments for political leverage. But beyond these immediate risks to their safety, The ICRC's expulsion will terminate a vital humanitarian lifeline, the channel of communication between detainees and their families. Deprived of any means to connect, detainees will endure heightened psychological distress, while their families will be left into a situation of agonizing uncertainty. So I think this will aggravate the already existing humanitarian crisis.
Thank you, Siranush. Philippe, can you put the detention of these ethnic Armenians in Azerbaijan into context? How did they come to be in Azerbaijani custody, and what does that tell us about their likely fate?
Thank you. Yes, I think this is a very important question. As you know, there has been an independent Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh called Artsakh in Armenian, and it has been established after a democratic process, which was a referendum based on the Soviet constitution. So before Armenia and Azerbaijan became independent republics. Of course, Azerbaijan has always refused the outcome of this referendum, but a republic has been established with structured bodies, a legislative and executive government. And for over 30 years, this republic has functioned very normally and democratically. And of course, this republic could exist, thanks to the support of the Armenian Republic and also from the Armenian diaspora. When Azerbaijan decided to tell everybody that the negotiations in the framework of a Minsk group that has been established. As I recall, the Minsk group was co-chaired by France, United States, and Russia to establish the principles on which the problem of Nagorno-Karabakh would be resolved. So pacifically. And among these principles, you had, of course, the principles of territorial integrity confronting to the principle of self-determination. But the discussions were ongoing. And amongst the principles decided by this group, the first one was that the issue would be solved pacifically, so without recourse to force, to war. And secondly, the status of Nagorno-Karabakh was left to the ultimate stage of a negotiation process. So Azerbaijan decided in 2020 that it was enough, that the negotiations were going nowhere, and so made recourse to the force, military force. So that was the first step. The second step, so they won the war, but with equal number of victims on each side. In 2023, actually by the December 2022, they decided to make a blockade on the remaining territory. So this blockade lasted 9 months. Only ICRC was allowed to make transfers of sick people to Armenia for getting cares. After 9 months, so there was a final assault on this remaining territory and the forced displacement of the whole population. And this is during this forced displacement that Azerbaijani forces arrested 23 people, We will tell you later that some of them are prisoners of war, combatants, and some of the others are political prisoners because they were former rulers of this independent republic. That's the story behind the arrest, detention, and today trial of these people. So the context is in fact a lasting conflict, but it is also the conflict between self-determination and territorial integrity that unfortunately the international community didn't succeed to solve pacifically. So that's the context.
Thank you indeed, Philippe. Arpi, when we use the word detainee in this context, what kind of detainees are we talking about? Are they prisoners of war? Are they hostages? Are they political prisoners? Can you unpack this for us a little?
Thank you. Indeed, it did work. Indeed, as Philippe has started mentioning already, some of those who are detained are prisoners of war, but some of them are political prisoners because they're detained for their views that they expressed for self-determination for the Artsakh nation. They are for their role, the position they've had in the also mentioned by Philippe, well-functioning government in Artsakh. So there is a mix of background and how we qualify them as detainees. But in the end, they're all basically hostages because they are used as bargaining chips for each and every negotiation process. And unfortunately, at the moment, we see that that process is dragging. There is no solution, but they are used in this process as hostages without any solution.
Thank you, Arpi. Siranush, we talk a lot about the 23 Armenian detainees, but in fact, these are simply the 23 acknowledged detainees. Can you tell us about the other missing Armenians from this conflict?
So, the society is more or less aware about these 23 detainees, their faces. However, they just symbolize a fraction of a larger issue. Mostly, those conflicts leave behind different groups of victims, detainees, but also missing persons, and more dangerously, people being forcibly disappeared. There are many Armenians who remain unacknowledged by Azerbaijan. Non-governmental organizations, they conducted a fact-finding mission. And according to our data, at least 80 Armenians who appeared in the hands of Azerbaijani armed forces are currently taken away from legal certainty. Government denies their captivity. They fail to provide any information about their fate. However, mounting evidence, including verified video footages, eyewitness testimonies, they suggest otherwise. They prove that at certain point, 80 Armenians were alive. Without any significant wounds, they appeared in the hands of Azerbaijani agents. Despite repeated inquiries from international organizations, including UN Working Group on Enforced Disappearances, legal representatives, other concerned parties, Azerbaijan has systematically responded with formal denials. asserting that these Armenians are not among prisoners of war and are not being held in Azerbaijani custody. But this consistent policy of denialism also goes in hand with lack of cooperation in investigating the fate, whereabouts of forcibly disappeared Armenians. And this causes suffering to their families and also obstructs justice. This refusal is coupled also with state failure to reveal information or identify the perpetrators who are seen in video or photo materials. Families find themselves in an unbearable psychological situation. This uncertainty causes a state of constant distress, unable to grieve or find a closure for the matter. Their suffering is compounded by the inaction of public authorities who have failed to initiate investigation, to include them as victims in investigations, to provide precise answers, or to take other meaningful steps directed to accountability. And this prolonged mental anguish amounts to a form of psychological torture, as families are trapped in an endless cycle of hope and despair, left to navigate their pain without any support or recognition of their sufferings. So we know that they were forcibly taken. Their families continue to search for them, and that Azerbaijani strategy of denial is preventing accountability and truth for families.
Thank you, Siranush. And I know that you've met many of these families and you spent time with them. So when you speak of their suffering, you know what you are speaking of. So we have 80 forcibly disappeared Armenians who were last seen in hands of Azerbaijani forces and have not been heard from since. But we also have these 23 detainees whose detention is acknowledged by the Azerbaijani authorities. And Arpi, could you tell us more about the conditions under which these 23 men are being held?
To be honest, it's very difficult to really comment on the actual situation of detention because the information that is available comes from very limited sources. That there hasn't been an independent monitoring body that's had the opportunity to visit the detainees, to see the conditions, and the picture that we have currently is based on the visits of ICRC that has been luckily there up until now. And as Siranush mentioned, that time is coming to end as well. But up until now, yes, ICRC has provided some information. And the other available information is from families, which doesn't paint any picture that is human rights compliant. For example, if we look at Ruben Vartanyan's detention conditions, especially last year when he held a hunger strike to oppose the detention, it's very gruesome. He was held, as the statement of the family says, that he was held in full isolation. Considering that he was actually on hunger strike, there was no medical examination to check the health condition, and the health condition was deteriorating. We've also seen in some of the footages traces of torture, inhuman degrading treatment, and the fact that Azeri government claims that the ombudsperson has visited, it doesn't. We know that it's not an independent body to be trustworthy, and The Council of Europe, for example, Council of Europe Committee on the Prevention of Torture has been trying to make a visit, and it's continually denied, which really shows that raises huge concern.
Yeah, thank you, RP. And as you mentioned, even in the video footage that is released, the trials happening in Baku right now, the evidence of abuse is visible on the faces of these men. Philippe, let's move to the trials that are currently taking place in Baku. 16 Armenians are currently on trial in Baku before a military court on charges ranging from genocide to slavery. Azerbaijan says it is simply holding war criminals to account. What should we make of this claim?
I have not heard about the slavery charge, but yes, some of the people have been charged with genocide. I guess they refer to what they allege to be the Khojalu genocide. And others, and especially the former leaders of this Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, the one who were ruling this republic, have been charged with terrorism. So terrorism is, as everybody knows, the preferred charge of countries who don't want to tell the truth about their real motivations. And how come can be terrorists while they were ruling a country, and a country which was involved in the Minsk group negotiations. I mean, they were sitting at the table of negotiations indirectly, but they were recognized as a party to the negotiations. So they were part of a diplomatic process, and now they are considered as a terrorist. So this is the first thing we can say, and since there has been no independent prosecution, and since the detainees have no independent attorneys, I mean, unfortunately, they probably will be condemned to what Azerbaijan wants to condemn to. Why? Because they are the symbol of resistance. They wanted to perpetuate the existence of this Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh. So it was external self-determination. They didn't want to come back again under the administration of Azerbaijan. So this is their main fault, the reason why they are today tried and probably condemned in the coming months.
And thank you, Philippe. Cyrinush, Philippe has begun to address this, but what can you tell us about the trials themselves, the ways in which they're being conducted, the respect or lack thereof for basic rights of the accused in these trials?
First, it is important. And the framework in which Azerbaijani judiciary operates. And Azerbaijan's judicial system is widely recognized as one of the least independent and most corrupt in the world. There is a concentration of power in the hands of executive branch, which secures that judiciary serves the political interests rather than the rule of law in the country. And we have many reports, including a recent report from US Department of State. They documented how Azerbaijani judiciary takes instructions from presidential administration, particularly on politically sensitive cases. And judges presiding over Armenian trials are deeply aligned with Azerbaijani leadership. These are the same judges who routinely issued politically motivated verdicts against opposition figures, independent journalists, human rights defenders, and now they are responsible for ruling on cases involving Armenian political and military leaders, cases that are deeply tied to Azerbaijani nationalist agenda and very sensitive issue of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. So there is no scenario in which an Azerbaijani judge operating in an environment of systemic discrimination against Armenians or anti-Armenian sentiment could deliver an impartial ruling. However, we can pinpoint specific aspects of fair trial guarantees which were violated in multiple ways. Denial of legal representation is one aspect. Defense lawyers are either state appointed and act in line with political directives, or are independent lawyers who face persecution for taking on sensitive cases. So private attorneys are frequently disbarred, imprisoned, threatened, making legal defense nearly impossible. The International Commission of Jurists has reported that Azerbaijan suppresses independent legal representation. Besides, those trials operate under an assumption of guilt rather than an impartial examination of facts. The legal proceedings are structured to justify Azerbaijani government narrative on Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Defendants and their lawyers are often denied access to case materials or receive inadequate translations, inadequate time, which prevents them from proper preparation and presentation of cases. Defense witnesses are not permitted to testify, leaving the prosecution's claims unchallenged. Apart from that, we have these controlled secret proceedings. Independent journalists, human rights organizations, international observers are barred from attending those trials, hearings. Only state-approved individuals are approved inside the courtroom. So we receive information from one side, and this partial biased information is leaked to the public. Trials are conducted without monitoring proceedings, and also access to key evidence is not provided or publicized under the pretext of national security. Even during those trials, we have heard allegations about torture. We have seen photos of Ruben Vartanyan with visible injuries, but without any reaction from judges. International human rights standards require where a person is taken under state custody in a good health condition without visible injuries, but receives, there are signs of visible injuries there, an investigation should be open to understand the causes. And the burden is on state authorities to deny any version of torture. But we have seen that no actions were taken by judges to understand the causes of visible injuries during those trials. In this environment, there is no doubt that Armenian detainees are being subjected to Sham trials designed to serve Azerbaijani political objectives. They are about consolidating Azerbaijani narrative, silencing Armenian voices, and legitimizing human rights abuses under the pretext of legal proceedings.
Thank you, Siranush. Time is marching on, and we want to leave time for questions from our audience. So I'd like to direct a question to the whole group. A few days ago, an opinion was publicly released by the UN Human Rights Council's Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. It was actually filed 4 months ago, but it wasn't made public until a few days ago. So it was filed before the trials began, before the ICRC was excluded from working in Azerbaijan. But this opinion sided with the Azerbaijani government against the lawyers of Ruben Vardanyan, maybe the most prominent of the 23 detainees, and considers that his case is not one of arbitrary detention. I'd like to ask all three of you, what do you make of this opinion?
Well, as you know, working group is made of independent experts. Not all of them are knowledgeable of the region, so aspects and specific challenges and conflicts. But I would say a few words from a legal standpoint. If you look at the conclusion of this working group, they have examined this case without taking consideration for the context of the case, the one that I have explained just before. That's first, but more importantly, it comes in opposition to 10 years of reports, resolution, expert opinions saying that there is real ethnic discrimination against Armenians in Azerbaijan, and so starting from the ECRI, which is the European body against racial discrimination, continuing with CERD, with the Committee Against Torture, which last year mentioned very strongly of course, the torture treatment of prisoners, but with a specific mention of Armenian prisoners. The European Parliament passed a few resolutions specifying this ethnic discrimination, and above all, the International Court of Justice, which is currently judging about the interstate claim from Armenia against Azerbaijan, on the basis of the International Convention on Elimination of all forms of this, racial discrimination, has adopted temporary measures precisely on recognizing there is a plausibility of racial discrimination against Armenians, and indicating these measures to protect all Armenians from this racial discrimination. And even during the debates at the International Court of Justice, Azerbaijan government has recognized some of the facts and committed to withdraw some of the measures that they had taken, especially at the end of the war in November 2020. They had created a museum in Baku, showing in a very indelicate manner, exposing the Armenians there. And Baku recognized before the court that it was inappropriate, and they withdraw what they have said, and what they have made. So even Azerbaijan government recognized this racial discrimination. So it comes to a very big surprise, that kind of opinion.
I may comment further. So it is more than 4 months old, and some developments happened which are not reflected anyhow in the court's opinion. Specifically, it occurred before the transfer of Ruben Vardanyan's case to Baku military court. and blatant due process abuses, which we are raising also today. And the working group has a long set position that military courts aren't competent to try civilians, and military judges, prosecutors aren't independent or impartial to prosecute such cases. So we should be mindful of those developments which were not the situation at the moment when this opinion was given. But I would agree with Philip that the working group disregarded the context of a conflict, and here we have a consensus within international community. Particularly, UN Security Council addressed the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, and resolution has never gone so far to question the lawfulness of declaration of independence of Nagorno-Karabakh, or to call the international community not to recognize its declaration. And I would like to contrast this situation with other existing situations across the globe. The Cyprus situation, where Security Council Resolution 541 explicitly deplored the declaration of the Turkish Cypriot authorities as invalid. And Security Council further called upon all states not to recognize any Cypriot state other than the Republic of Cyprus. We had similar way of reaction to invalid declarations in the case of Southern Rhodesia, where it declared to call upon states not to recognize this illegal racist minority regime in Southern Rhodesia, and called all states not to entertain any diplomatic or other relations with it. So this is not the case with Nagorno-Karabakh. We even have this OSCE Minsk group, which received powers from UN Security Council to deal with the situation, and the leaders of Nagorno-Karabakh Republic were part of international talks. Moreover, this regime received financial support, including from US government and so on. So it is very logical to expect that foreign states or international organizations were providing financial support to so-called terrorist regimes. Thank you.
Okay, it worked. Just maybe to reiterate the fact that the case was considered completely in isolation without taking the context into the consideration, but also to highlight, as you mentioned, the opinion was prepared months ago, but the way that Azerbaijan's government is communicating about it is using misinterpreting. So it's about false information as well, but misinterpreting, saying that the working group has confirmed that the trials are according human rights standards and they're fair and all that. So it's also important for the international community to see how the misinterpretation works and how Azeri government is using even in this situation.
Thank you all. We're now going to open up the floor to questions. Please keep your questions brief, to the point. I'm going to try to set a timer for 1 minute. We'll see if I manage. But while I'm working on this, does anyone have a question for our panelists today? Yes, Thibault.
Yes, thank you for all your interventions. So actually I have two questions, one historical and one political. The first one regarding Armenia's declaration of independence in 1990, and the thing about reunification with Nagorno-Karabakh, which seems to be the main stumbling block with the peace treaty with Azerbaijan. So why this reunification has not been achieved in the early 90s when Armenia was militarily stronger than Azerbaijan? Maybe it was a good opportunity at this time. Now it seems that it's too late to have Nagorno-Karabakh as part of the Armenian state. And the second question is how we could still believe in an Armenian Nagorno-Karabakh when it seems that only members of the European Parliament and the one of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe defend the Armenians, and the heads of states and the European Commission, they prefer economic ties with Azerbaijan, and Armenia itself seems to have given the fight. Thank you.
I will start. On the political aspect regarding the declaration of independence and the reunification, we cannot say anything today because unfortunately this is a lost opportunity for Armenia. But that shows that the issue was not only a question of self-determination, but it was a real national project coming from the history of relations between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. I want to remind everybody that this region of Nagorno-Karabakh was inhabited by Armenians even before the creation of both Armenian republics and Azerbaijani republics. They have always been independent region, mountainous region. And this is at the occasion of a decision of a communist party for the South Caucasus, which in July 1921, it has been decided that this region should be annexed to, put under the umbrella of Azerbaijan, Soviet Republic. At that time, there were some conflicts between some Muslim groups and Christian groups in the Soviet Union. So it was a way to appease these conflicts. But the Soviet Republic of Armenia always claimed the reintegration of Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia all along the years of Soviet Union. And second most important aspect is that from 1923, this region has always have a status of autonomous region in the Soviet constitutions. So they have never been under full control of Azerbaijan. And so if you look at the 100 years of history, they have never been directly administered by Azerbaijan. So from the legal aspect, in fact, very few countries, so the third states, but also Armenia, also today claim the return of Artsakh Armenian in Nagorno-Karabakh. But as lawyers and lawyers representing the interest of the Artsakh people, this is our duty to defend their rights, because the right to return of these people is absolute and recognized by international law. And there are many precedents in international jurisdiction, so confirming this right to return of people who have been forced, who have been subjected to forced displacement. So there is no question. The legal fight will continue, because this is for the legacy of humanity and for the legacy of Artsakh people rights.
Thank you, Philippe. Are there other questions from the floor? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm here on behalf of the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute. We are currently undertaking a review of the independence of the Azerbaijani Bar Association. As far as you're aware, what is the position of the Azerbaijani Bar Association on the continued detention and the sham trials of ethnic Armenians?
Sorry.
Yes.
So we are not aware of any reaction. So their approach is to be silent on this sensitive matter. What we can confirm that we, as lawyers representing some of prisoners of war who are currently in Baku, were unable to access Azerbaijan and visit our clients. And there is an absolute right as a part of a right to fair trial to have confidential, unhindered, unlimited visits with a lawyer attorney representing. And we do have power of attorneys, which were given by the families of prisoners of war. Those powers of attorneys were adduced to International Regional Court, European Court of Human Rights. Our powers were recognized by the court. The court is in a communication with us. However, our powers are not being respected by Azerbaijani government. And so far, we are deprived of any possibility to communicate to our clients, even through phones, through online meetings, and so on.
Aspect of your question, we have tried to hire independent attorneys in Azerbaijan, so not state attorneys, for our clients. They are scared to take the cases of ethnic Armenians, and because if they do it, they are considered as traitors to the nation, and of course their business will be affected by if they do that. But beyond this, they told us that even if they accept to take the defense of these people, it will not change the course of the trials. The only positive benefit would be a better communication with the client, but that's all. They refused to be hired for providing a real legal defense.
Okay, it works. Just to add very briefly, I wanted to comment along the lines as Philip mentioned, the fact that in general, the crackdown of the legal profession, disbarment of lawyers who have voiced any anti-government, they have had anti-government sentiments. But also, if we look at some of the reasons for political prisoners. At the moment, there are around 360 political prisoners, Azeri political prisoners, to clarify. And some of them are those, especially as Philip mentioned, those that have either spoken against the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan or have had any contact with Armenians. They've been charged with treason. So for the bar to publicly make any statement, it would really mean that they want to, go against the government and take the consequences.
Thank you all. That concludes our session for today. Thank you for coming. There are sandwiches on the way out. Please help yourselves and have a good rest of the Human Rights Council.